Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. This is Rati here. So in my last video guys, I spoke about how to publish a poetry book or how to get your poetry book published. Now in this video, I want to talk about the topic how to write a poem or how to write poetry. I will share with you my own poetic process and in the process give you some tips on how to write poetry. So hopefully you're going to get some useful things out of this video which will be helpful in your poetic journey. But before I begin, let me introduce myself briefly to those of you who are watching my channel for the first time. So hi, I am Rati and I am a poet, writer, journalist, YouTuber, and I've gotten 2 books of English poetry published till now. My first book of English poems, the Sunset Sonata, has been published by Sahitya Academy, India's National Academy of Letters. And my second poetry book, I'd Like a Bit of the Moon, has been published by Red River pretty recently. I also write poems in Hindi, but my books which have been published till now are in English, although my Hindi poems have appeared in various journals. So that was about me. Now let's just begin the video. So let's talk about the common questions, that come in the mind of aspiring poets, and let me answer those questions one by one. So the first question, that comes in the mind of any aspiring poet, and all new poets have this question, is that how do I start writing? Do I follow a fixed writing schedule? Or should I have a fixed writing slot every day and a fixed place, as in sit on my desk and write every day? Or what else, how should I start writing? Now, my answer to this question would be, and before answering this question, let me talk about my own poetic process. So when I started writing, guys, I never followed a fixed schedule for writing poetry. In fact, I was writing at the most random of places, at the most random of times, all over the place. I was writing in cafes, restaurants, all sorts of public places. I was scribbling while traveling, outdoors, anywhere and everywhere. In fact, I wrote a lot of my poems, I composed a lot of my poetry in offices. When I was studying in England and doing my masters in the UK, I took up a lot of random admin jobs after my masters, to fend for myself. I stayed there for an extra year. And these jobs were really boring, like, a lot of kind of like stuff a lot of stuff to do with computers and all. So in between the tasks, when I was really bored, I used to just sit and write poetry. And even when I came back to India and, I started working here and there, I started doing the jobs, then also I wrote a lot of my poetry in offices. So I would confess that. So for me, it wasn't like an organized endeavor, and I never had a fixed time to, sort of fixed time slot to write as well. But then, I would say that with the passage of time, after getting 2 books published and stuff, I've become more organized now. And now I can confidently say that, if I want to write poetry, if I decide that, today I want to write poetry, or I want to devote this 1 week to writing poetry, to working on poetry, then now I have the confidence and discipline to do that. But earlier I could not do that. So my answer to a question would be, do what works for you. If you're an erratic person and if you don't have this, schedule following kind of a habit, then don't force yourself to do so. But if you think you're completely stuck and you're not able to write any poetry and you really don't know how to start writing poetry, then I would suggest that you make some kind of a schedule. Devote 1 hour at least every day to write poetry and set aside this 1 hour. And during this 1 hour, you don't have to do anything else. And maybe for the first couple of days, even for 10 days to 12 days, you will be frustrated. Maybe you're not able to write any poem altogether. But trust me, guys, after a couple of days, you will start, getting some poems, and your poetry collection, the collection of your written poems will slowly start to increase. The second question, which a lot of poets, aspiring poets have in mind, is that, what do I write about? And that's the question that a lot of people ask me when they hear about my poetry books, that what do you write about? What themes do you write about? So obviously a lot of new poets have this question that, okay, I have to write poetry, I will sit and write a poem, but what topics should I cover? How do I get ideas for writing poetry? What themes should I write about? Now, again, talking about my own poetic process, and to answer your question, I would say that poetry writing is not a logical, straightforward process. It's not like, writing fiction that you weave a concrete story. Poetry is a slightly different kind of a genre. It's not that straightforward. So the approach here is also different. it's not, it's not so systematic. So it's not like you sit and, you make a list of topics, you make a list of particular themes, and then you decide and you write poems on the themes which you made a list of. Poetry writing doesn't work like that. I'll tell you how it works. Whatever you do in your life, whatever new experiences you gather, the sights, sounds, smells, everything, it interacts with the material which is already a part of your cognitive consciousness, and that's how ideas for poetry are produced. To put it very simply, anything that you do in your day-to-day life, whether you're reading a book, you're watching a movie, you're listening to music, you are traveling, you're talking to friends, you're interacting with new people, you're pursuing a new hobby, or even thinking along a slightly different line, everything is potential material for poetry. All this stuff interacts with material that's already a part of your cognitive consciousness, and you get new ideas. So in a nutshell, you don't have to do anything new for writing poetry. You just have to live your life and, be open to sort of new experiences and connect them creatively with stuff that's already existing in your head. I'll give you an example. So I recently, just yesterday in fact, I wrote this poem called The Cafe in Verse. Now, how did the idea of this poem come to me? So of course, being a poet, I'm passionate about poetry. But recently I've also, grown quite fond of cafes, because the city where I stay in India, Dehradun, it has a lot of beautiful cafes, lovely cafes. And because I'm freelancing these days, so I tend to work a lot from these cafes. I just take my laptop there and sit, and I tend to, click some pictures sometimes and make a video when I'm bored. So I would place, some book on the table. So the other day I put my poetry book on the table and I just clicked some pictures in this beautiful cafe, my poetry book, a cup of coffee. And it just came to my mind, that it would be so beautiful to have a poetry cafe. And I wonder if such a cafe exists in some part of the world, a poetry cafe. And just randomly, this thought came to my head, and then this thought stayed with me. And then yesterday, finally, I ended up writing a poem about a poetry cafe, The Cafe in Verse. So you can see, how the idea of cafe and me clicking a picture there, intersected with so many ideas that were already in my head, and I wrote this poem. I can give you another example. So I'm thinking of writing a poem titled An Ode to Radio. So how did this idea come about again? Now, I'm a big fan of Pablo Neruda, who has written odes to literally everything under the sun. Ode to tomato, ode to wine, salt, so many things. So I'm quite fascinated by this idea of writing odes. And then I'm fascinated by the medium of radio. I've worked with radio before. And recently I was invited by this radio station called Radio Gham Chaya in Dehradun. And they took my interview on some topic. So then my fascination for radio came back. And then how did all these things merge? My fascination for radio, my fascination for odes, coming from my inspiration with Pablo Neruda's poetry. All these things came back together to inspire me to write a poem, An Ode to Radio. I haven't written this poem, but I will write this poem, and don't steal my idea, please. I was just joking. So anyway, so this is the process of poetic creation, like I said, and this would be the answer to the second question of the aspiring poets. Another question that a lot of new poets have, and it perplexes them, is that, should I write on paper, should I write in a diary, or should I write on a computer, directly on the computer or on the laptop? Because a lot of, people have this thing that if you write directly on paper, it's more authentic, the poetry. But I would honestly tell you that, all that is just a lot of talk. It really doesn't matter where you write. You can write on the wall even, as long as it makes sense to you, as long as you're happy with it. And it's the content of your poetry, the craft of your poetry that matters, whether you're writing on paper or you're writing on computer or you're writing on the floor. It doesn't really matter. Talking about my own poetic process, in the beginning, I used to write a lot on paper, just scribble here and there. But that was like, again, a practical thing, because I wasn't really carrying my laptop to all these places. And I was writing a lot in public places. But nowadays, I'm not going so much to public places every day. And if I go to a cafe, I have my laptop with me. So I'm writing directly on the computer. So for me, it's more of a matter of convenience and dynamics, than any inherent preference for the computer as compared to the paper. Would I like to, sort of write more in a diary, more on paper? Maybe yes, to kind of like experiment and find out, if there's any difference between the poetry produced on paper and on laptop. But I don't really think so, I think the main thing is sort of to write, and you should not really get bogged down by these silly things, that whether I should write on paper or whether I should write on the computer directly on the laptop. Yes, but one advice I would certainly give you is that when you're traveling and stuff, you should certainly keep a diary handy, because a lot of ideas can come, a lot of ideas can strike. So even if you don't have time to write a proper poem, you can take some notes. Another tip that I would give to aspiring poets is that, joining a poetry group or any writer's circle or taking advantage of any opportunity to perform your poetry in public is also very important for honing your poetry writing skills. And I cannot emphasize this enough, because this has helped me a lot in my poetic journey. A lot of people think, and I think that's the general, sort of idea, that poetry writing is a very reclusive and secluded activity. You're just sitting on the table and you're surrounded by books, you're reading a lot of books and writing. But I don't think, from my experience at least, it doesn't work like that. Like with any other craft or with any other profession, you benefit from teamwork, you learn from other people, and that's how you hone your skills. So even if, you don't have a proper writer's circle in your city, you cannot find one, do get together with a couple of like-minded poets, have these informal meetups, gatherings, and do not while away these informal meetups and just chit-chat and banter, but actually take this opportunity to do some serious writing work. Give yourself a topic and a deadline, like the 4 of you or 5 of you have to write on this topic a poem in half an hour, and after half an hour you have to open your diary and read out your poems aloud. So trust me guys, these peer pressure things really work, because if you're sitting alone at your desk, it's easier to be unproductive and while away time. But when there's the pressure of ki I have to sort of like recite my poetry in front of the other person, it's a bit embarrassing, then that actually works in a positive way. And just like with sports, or just like with any other profession or hobby club, it's the same with poetry. The teamwork spirit, the healthy teamwork spirit and the healthy peer pressure thing works very positively. So I would really suggest, that you have to take every opportunity to perform your poetry in public as well, because that gives you a lot of confidence in terms of taking forward your journey as a poet. The last tip that I would give you is that, another question which many new poets have is that, what if I am, really, really stuck and I really don't know what to write about? I have no clue, I'm just completely frozen, and everybody faces that kind of situation. It's normal. So the way to get out of that situation when you cannot absolutely write any poetry, I think, is to, revert to the school children mode, where you actually, force yourself to do a certain task and give yourself like a well-defined homework kind of a task. So theme-based poetry works very well in that. You have to give yourself a push and, give yourself a theme to write on, and then give yourself a deadline also, that, okay, within a week I have to produce something on that theme. Now, do not keep the theme too specific, but give yourself a wider general theme. For example, you can give yourself the task that I have to write a poem about my city, or 2-3 poems about my city in a matter of a week, and no matter what happens, I have to write poems about my city. So you can pick up different themes within the city, but the large overarching framework is the city. So for example, we have a poetry group called Moonweavers, and we have done so many different theme-based poetry events. We had a poetry theme called City and Village. Then one was, the life of the underdog. So I think, a lot of this kind of like, I know it sounds kiddish and like school children like, but it really, trusts me guys, it really works in pushing yourself to write poetry, by giving yourself regularly giving yourself themes and props and all that. Lastly, I would just say that it's the content of your poetry that matters, and the craft and the the language, the polishing and all, it comes later. It comes gradually on its own with time. But what really matters is the novelty of your ideas and the depth of your content. Because, no amount of editing or sophisticated language can compensate, for the lack of any newness or for the lack of any innovativeness in your poetry or content. So that's it for today's guys. Thank you so much for listening. If you like my video, please do press the like button, and please do share it with like-minded poets and friends. And please don't forget to press the subscribe button as well. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.